Welcome to Talking Freire and Environmentalism, Ecopedagogy, where we talk about the needs, challenges, and possibilities of reinventing Freire and other critical pedagogues towards education for praxis for environmental justice and planetary sustainability, both for humans, but also beyond humans. It is hosted by the Paulo Freire Institute at UCLA, which is now in its 20th year and is part of a network of 15 Paulo Freire Institutes worldwide. My name is Greg William Misiaszek, and I'm an Associate Director of the Paulo Freire Institute at UCLA. Today, I'll be talking with Danilo Streck. Danilo is a professor at the Graduate School of Education at the University of Caxias do Sul, Brazil. He was a visiting scholar at the Latin American Center at UCLA and at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin, Germany. As well, he is a visiting professor at the University of Saigon in Germany and at the University of Toronto in Canada. His current research projects focus on popular education, Latin American pedagogy, pedagogical mediations of participatory social processes, and participatory research methodologies. He holds a UNESCO Chair in Global Citizenship Education and Socio-Environmental Justice. In addition to all this, he is also the co-editor of the International Journal of Action Research, and he coordinates the editions of the Paulo Freire Encyclopedia, which are published in Portuguese, English, and Spanish. So my first question is, within a minute or two, how would you describe your environmental pedagogical work?
Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and to others on this issue. Greg, I think I can define myself as an educator, a teacher, a researcher who is concerned with environmental issues. I could not say that I'm an environmentalist in the strict sense of the word, since I really don't teach, like I don't teach classes on environmental education. I don't do specific research on environmental issues, but I think that in my life and in my career, I have increasingly become aware of the relevance of environmental concerns. So that's, I think, the way I define myself as an educator who sees in today environmental issues as necessarily linked to the educational tasks.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that description. I'm sure that you're selling yourself short a bit, because everything that we teach, especially indirectly on environmental issues, is so very important. And I know with your UNESCO chair, you do have that socio-environmental aspect. And congratulations for your appointment to the chair. So my second question was on that chair. Within the same 2-3 minutes, how would you describe your new chair? And hopefully I'm saying this right. It's the UNESCO Chair of Education in Global Citizenship and Socio-Environmental Justice. And congratulations again on that.
Well, thank you, Greg. I see it both as a privilege and as a challenge. Mm. I think really having a chair on global citizenship and social environmental justice brings you in contact with many people around the world, researchers, educators, teachers, other professionals who are working with similar questions and issues. So it's really a privilege in terms of building contacts, partnerships, in terms of work. Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's also a challenge to make a substantial contribution in these two interconnected themes in education. First, this expanded notion of citizenship, which I think is a requirement today. Yeah. So seeing citizenship beyond the frontiers of the nation state, and also the question of socio-environmental justice. So it's really a challenge to bring these two big issues together. It sounds really ambitious, yeah? To
Very
bring
ambitious.
them together and make a contribution on local, national, regional, and on international level. That's what I expect for the chair. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. And it seems like you have your work cut out for you. It's got some incredible, important goals, but I'm sure it's going to be a difficult, complex, messy journey in the next couple of years on doing the chair. I can just imagine all the people that you're trying to get together, all the scholars throughout the world. So my next question is, how do you see your environmental education work or education work overall connecting with Paulo Freire? And I know that you're a famous Freirean, and you've been part of the encyclopedia of Paulo Freire, and I know that's in multiple languages, and I think it's in its 4th edition or something like that.
It's
so how
edition. Yeah.
Great, wonderful work. And thank you for inviting me. I think I have one entry with Carlos Alberto Torres on ideology. So how do you connect Freire to your work?
Well, this is a big question. I'll try to make it short. Yeah. When starting to read Freire back in the 1970s, environment was not really much on the agenda. Yeah? You know, it was a time of pedagogy of the oppressed, theology of liberation, liberation theology. It was a time of pedagogy of the theater of the oppressed and theory of dependencies. So it was a different context. I think the big question was really how to overcome oppression in the social, political sense. This was the basic question at this time. Now, I think also that when continuing the reading Paulo Freire, I guess there is a growing awareness of the interconnectedness of social and environmental issues. I guess this is true for us who read Paulo Freire, and I think it is also true for Paulo Freire's work. Yeah? So if one reads his first writings to the last ones, one can see that environmental or the loving for nature, love for nature and for the whole world. I think it was also always part of his work. But I think there is a growing emphasis on this aspect. Yeah. So I still to your question, I think humanization for Paulo Freire since the beginning was a basic concept. Now, humans are very much linked in his work to nature through culture. Yeah, so culture comes in here. But nature is important. So whenever you destroy nature, you destroy the possibility of being human. Even if he sometimes says, well, nature is the support for us to become humans, to make culture, yeah? But it's not a support in an instrumental sense. Yeah? It's more than this. It's part of what we are. We are in this sense, cultural and historical beings. Paulo Freire will also always make this very clear. But we also exist together with everything else that exists on the planet. So humanization and being historical, social, cultural beings does not kind of dichotomize from what we are as part of this world of nature. Yeah? Then in Paulo Freire, I think that since the beginning, love for people and love for the world, which includes trees, rivers. Yeah, he tells, sometimes he mentions this. They go hand in hand. So loving people, loving the world, they are part of the same process of being and becoming human. That's the way I think Paulo Freire is connected to environmental education today.
Wonderful and very beautifully said. I think a lot of people, I can think of some scholars that say that Freire was anti-environmental, and one of that aspects is that the uniqueness of human beings and stuff, and they see that as him not valuing the rest of nature and him separating us from nature, where, you know, I think that's a very shallow reading or of Pedagogy of the Press. Most people just have read or hasn't read his later works, but even in, like you said, in Pedagogy of the Press, he is discussing not as much as he could have, but very, he does connect back to nature in different parts and stuff like that, and he emphasizes it more later on. So beautifully said. So within your work on your UNESCO chair, how do you see it connecting to the work of Freire?
Well, Greg, again, I guess I see Freire's presence in the work of the chair in three dimensions, or in three aspects. Yeah? First, I would say in terms of methodology. We are trying to really make the chair a dialogical, an instrument for dialogue and through dialogue. Yeah, really a collective process. We have weekly meetings, open meetings. So sometimes we have 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, different people bringing their projects and discussing. So it's, I think it's in terms of methodology, it's a dialogical process which we are trying to open up more and more for more people from in Brazil and also other countries. Yeah. So dialogue, as I would say, methodological principle. I also see Paulo Freire in the epistemological approach. Yeah? In what sense? I guess in terms of asking what kind of citizenship are we trying to promote? Yeah? What do we understand by global citizenship? From what perspective are we trying to promote citizenship that has a planetary dimension? Is it the official perspective, just what our governments are saying, or the official bodies? Are we, well, what do we do with the market-driven globalization? How do we understand or eventually promote and join in building a global citizenship from, I would say, from below, from social movements, from popular education, people who are kind of involved in building relationships based on solidarity, on on participation, and a better life for all,
mm,
justice. Yeah.
yeah,
So this would be the epistemological approach, where I think Paulo Freire is a key uh,
mm,
reference. I would also include here an existential perspective, Greg.
mm,
What do I mean by this? It's not only about cognitive learning, about doing research and gathering data, but it's also about about ourselves, about
mhm,
ourselves as people, as persons, as citizens. Yeah,
mm,
and there I think Paulo Freire is important here. For instance, when he talks about, well, amorosity,
mhm,
amorosidade, in it's difficult
mhm,
to translate, I guess, in the encyclopedia. It
mm,
has been translated as lovingness. Yeah?
mm,
So it's really a way of being in the world, not dichotomizing, say, the intellectual, cognitive aspects from feeling, from emotions, from the body.
mhm,
And I think Latin America has an interesting tradition in this. Like Orlando Falsborda, the Colombian sociologist, will talk about sociologia sentipensante,
mm,
thinking, feeling, sociology. Yeah,
mhm,
it's really more about just thinking the word. It's feeling together. Yeah.
yeah.
So this, I would say, is Paulo Freire's presence in terms of methodology, in terms of the epistemology, and also in this existential perspective.
Great. Well, thank you. All those things are so very important. This aspect of dialogue that I see that a lot of times in the world, we see more and more the lack of, um, the aspect of social media, and we can get our certain channels and just really not have any more dialogue, any foundation where we can discuss things, aspects of, problematizing, like you say, citizenship, the contested trains. A lot of people think of citizenship as all wonderful, but it's also a tool of oppression, including global citizenship education, teaching, focusing on the non-citizen, who is a non-citizen, and also that aspect that you talk about, that I think my experiences in Latin America and obviously in the United States is the things of pedagogy I love is really difficult, especially I think in the United States, to explain what does Freire talk about. When he talks about loving each other as a human being and things like that. How do we describe that and teach for that, this humanization and other aspects, and that love, respect for nature too. So when you're doing your work, what specific, is there specific theories from critical theorists, Freirean theories that you focus on a little bit more than others within your work on either teaching or writing or everything that you do?
Well, I think, Greg, in a sense, we have already touched some of the uh, points or aspects of Freire's work with that I think I keep coming back to them. Yes,
Mhm,
I think it happens to most of us who kind of put the feet on some place to find our grounds. Um, so I think, as I mentioned before, humanization is really a key concept to, to which I return when I see I'm coming back to humanization,
mhm,
and humanization in the sense not separate from environment. Okay, so from nature. So it's really a key concept today. What does it mean to be human in our world? I think the first paragraphs in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, they are still very much valid today. Yeah? We have to see what is our place in the world and what we are in this world today, which is different from when Paulo Freire wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In a sense, it's different. Yeah. I also think that from Paulo Freire, the inherently political dimension of teaching, whatever you teach and whatever you do research on. Yeah? So political dimension in a very, I would say, in a more radical sense, not sectarian sense. Yeah? Because today, you know, the discussion, at least in Brazil, that education shouldn't be political. But that's not what Paulo Freire is meaning by political. Yeah, political is that you get involved and you have an ethical perspective. And in Paulo Freire, the ethical perspective is quite clear. It's justice for all, and looking especially from the perspective of those who are the victims of an unjust system. And so this is really what it all means to have to be political. Now, as I mentioned before, today, I guess, at least in our context, the distinction Paulo Freire makes between sectarianism and radicalism is very important. So sectarians are dogmatic, fundamentalist, and being radical means really to going to the roots of the problems, to excavating the issues and seeing what lies below. And I always think, Greg, whenever you are willing to a real dialogue and a radical dialogue, you will find some common ground at some point. You will find some common ground at some point. So, but you cannot stay on the surface of issues. On the surface, you don't find this common ground, I think. So this is, I think, an important lesson from Paulo Freire. And as I mentioned before, dialogue, participation is key aspects for a democratic society and also for a loving relationship with the world, with the environment. Yeah, I think these are some key points to which I think I keep returning in my readings to Paulo Freire.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to sharing this video with parts of it with my students. A lot of times when I teach this aspect of education overall, but ecopedagogy, this aspect of, you know, what does Paulo Freire mean by saying that education cannot be apolitical, that education is always political. And sometimes, like you say, how do we define politics being political, and have to talk about, especially when I'm teaching, say, in China and other places, you know, it's well beyond government. It's this aspect of influences. So we always are influenced by our own understandings, our own ideas, our own epistemologies, our own histories, and so on and so on. So what are the influences on oppressions, on unsustainability and things like that. And what you said is incredibly well said, much better than I could ever explain it to my own students. So I'm looking forward to sharing this part and other parts with my students and others. So in trying to solve environmental issues currently, do you see certain aspects of Freire's teaching and work that's too limited in today's society? So, for example, I know that Carlos Torres did a article for a special issue that myself and Lauren Misiaszek did on silences, that there were certain silences that Freire has had. And working in this aspect that Freire talked about, there's always reinventions of educational work, of all our work, including his own. So do you see that any aspects of Freire that is limiting in today's society, like you said, how students interact with one another, how we interact with the world, intensifying globalization? Is there things that that there has been silences from Freire?
Okay, Greg, thank you for this question. I guess really we should have more time to approach this question you are raising. Yeah, my understanding it goes something like this. We have to realize that Freire lived in a different time than ours. That's to begin with. And he was very conscious of it. And he would say, I guess in reading Paulo Freire, we also understand that any time has its agenda, also its invisible spots. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So whenever you go back to the biggest thinkers in history, you will find these blind spots, these silences, and from the perspective of today, you can see, well, how did this big guy don't realize that, yeah? How couldn't he see it, or she? How couldn't she see it? Right? Yeah. For instance, if you take Rousseau, Social Contract. Mm-hmm. Today we see, well, it was really, Michel Serre would say, it was a contract not related to nature. It was just among persons, among humans. Yeah. Carol Pateman, it was a sexual contract. Women were left out. Charles Mill would say it was a racial contract. It was only about white men, sometimes only rich white men. Yeah. So you can see, well, how couldn't Rousseau see what was happening at this time? And even in his time, he was also criticized about this. But anyway, what I'm trying to say, different times have different agendas. There are always black or blind spots for every one of us. And I think reading Paulo Freire, his effort was really to overcome and to overcome as much as possible these blind spots. That's what his multiple perspective of approaching an issue, for instance. Yeah, he would come from phenomenology, existential. He would go to various disciplines to build his theory. Greg, so I guess you see what I'm understand what I'm trying to say. In the sense, Paulo Freire is a kind of inspiration for seeing, well, we are really unfinished beings, also in terms of our theoretical understanding. I am, you are, everyone is. Yeah? And, and so we always try our best to become as he would say, being more, ser mais, to become more as humans. Yeah, that means in this complex, multiple sense of being human. So I think in this sense, Paulo Freire is an inspiration, and we can see many aspects where he would, Paulo Freire would recognize, well, in my first writing, I really wasn't concerned about what women would say. So I wasn't, I didn't care about an inclusive language. He will recognize it. So you can say the same about environmental issues and other issues that are on the agenda today. We have new concepts, like I don't see that in the 70s, 80s, the concept of climate change, for instance. It wasn't really a concept at this time. Yeah. Or new instrument, new tools for working, for doing research. These tools were not available for Paulo Freire in his time. Yeah. So I really think, Greg, that if we don't read Paulo Freire in a dogmatic sense, we can be very free to say, well, he didn't see this aspect which we are seeing today. Yeah? And so I think a dogmatic reading of Paulo Freire, a fundamentalist reading of Paulo Freire, is as bad or as wrong as just discarding him. Yeah? I think both are not a good approach to Paulo Freire.
I agree with you on that for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the people who criticize Freire, and like many, and including ourselves, there is a lot of things that we can criticize about Freire, but putting it in a contextual way. For example,
I would add something here, which I sometimes say. The real question is not if Paulo Freire is still relevant or current for today. That's not the real question. The real question is, how does Paulo Freire help us to see relevant and current in our days? This is the real question. Yeah. So Paulo Freire isn't here anymore. So, but we are. It's our time. It's our turn to do something.
Yeah. It's so very true. And it reminds me when I'm teaching in different places, but especially in China, some of my students often ask, that Freire is so much different from, say, Confucius, Foundations of Education, and other ones. And my first year teaching, I remember finding an article by Shim, S-H-I-M, that talks about the commonalities and differences between Confucius, Plato, Freire, and Berber. And I think Dewey's in there too. And overall, a lot of the groundings are very much, there's more commonalities and differences a lot of times. And I have some wonderful discussions, as in every classroom, but some of the discussions often going back to, what would happen if they were all living today? Would they be having the same sort of ideas and understandings. And Confucius, there was no public education; it was educating for the very elite and things like that. So it's this aspect of how can we contextually utilize Freire and scholars and different scholars throughout the world, and trying to think, although it's impossible, what is the contextual reinventions, and how you explain the unfinished beings that Freire said so well, and you explained so very good too, this aspect that our earlier work as scholars is probably going to be very much different from our work currently. And I remember also a lecture from Michael Apple. He talks about that when he wrote Ideology and Curriculum, everything that he wrote was kind of reinventing that book of his, because we change as scholars, we change circumstances, the world changes, things like that. So thank you so much for that wonderful response to that question. So this question can't be answered obviously perfectly, but in your own perspectives, if Freire was alive today, what do you think he would focus most on environmentally, or socio-environmental justice wise? What do you think he'd be focusing on if he was living today?
Well, this is a quite difficult question to answer, but I'll try to say something to it, Greg. Well, I think he would insist on this idea of building a loving relationship with the environment, a caring relationship. I guess he would insist first in this sense, yeah. So not seeing environment as just an instrument, as a physical support. It's more, it's part of our life. I think he would emphasize this aspect. That's what I'm seeing from what I have read in Paulo Freire. A second aspect, I think he would help us to see that the environmental crisis is part of a set of crises. The economic, the social, the cultural, and you can go on and on. Yeah. So it has to do with the return of fascism in many parts of the world, of racism. We have just now learned about racism in sports and soccer, for instance, right now. So I think it would help us to see the bigger picture where environmental questions fit in. I think he always insisted on see the bigger picture. So environmental issues are connected to other issues concerning our life in this planet. And I think also, Greg, that he would not forget to reaffirm the role of liberal market economy in producing the world we are living in. So in his writing, he was quite always very clear about what the economic structure means for the way we produce our life and our ways of living. I think he would certainly reaffirm that we have to face the way we are producing our life on this planet.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think that's about where I see Paulo Freire would kind of focus right now.
mhm.
But
Yeah,
much
oh, I'm sorry.
more.
Yeah, I know this. I've used in my writing, and others have, coming from Mr. Gododi and others, this aspect of, Freire discussed that his next book was supposed to be on ecopedagogy, and I've heard the argument that his next book was actually supposed to be on neoliberalism. And there's probably other people who have said other aspects, but those connections between neoliberalism and the global market and intensifying globalization is so connected. This aspect of environmental issues, especially climate change, is a wicked problem or a super wicked problem that, it's so complex. There's no one solution, but many solutions, for example. And I think, environmental pedagogies that separate, well, this is a bad environmental issues, but we can only solve it without, like you said before, radically changing social aspects, economic aspects, political aspects of society. We're just going to hit into the superficial aspects, and they're not really going to be solved needing this radical approach. So, talking about maybe a wicked problem, but not a wicked problem, but the complexity. Regarding your UNESCO chair, what do you see as most important goals that you'll be trying to going towards? I believe in the next 5 years or more, if it gets extended. And what do you see as some of the challenges? I know that this is probably a question that you could probably talk about forever. But what are some of the key ones?
Yeah, I could talk much about it, but I'll be brief, yeah, and summarize some of the aspects, Greg. First, I think, is to bridge citizenship in this global perspective with environmental concerns. I think this is a priority, really, to see, well, these issues today go hand in hand. We you have to, well, local problems, regional problems, they are connected to problems in other parts of the world. So I think this is a challenge for the chair, and the chair has also, I think it's a means, an instrument for connecting with other people with similar concerns. So this would be one focus. Then I would say another goal is really to bring the issues to schools and community. In his opening conference, Gadotti was quite emphatic when saying, well, the chair does not make much sense if it does not go to schools, to community, and bring the issues to where people live. Yeah. So it's not only a place for academics to meet, which is very nice, but necessary, important, but it has to really permeate society. So this is a goal and a big challenge. Another goal is to network with other chairs, similar chairs in Brazil and also in other parts, in other continents and countries. This is already happening. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a very interesting meeting with people from different countries. meeting of chairs with a similar approach. Also, one goal of the chair is working on research. We will not forget this aspect. And in terms of gathering empirical data, like to support policies and actions, community actions, but also in terms of theory building. I remember here Carlos Alberto Torres saying, well, global citizenship education is an intervention in search of a theory. Is an intervention in search of concept. So I think one goal and one challenge is really to help to develop conceptually what it means to educate in this global perspective. Okay, I guess this would be it in terms of goals. Now we have some strategies going on. For instance, Carlos Torres will be with us as visiting professor. We are translating to Portuguese his book on theoretical and empirical foundations of critical global citizenship education. So it should be out in August this year. So there are some strategies to kind of accomplish these goals. We are working on it, and we need a lot of help and partnerships here. So you are invited to join us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for that description. I know that you could probably go on forever with all the goals and all the challenges. It's really it's going to be a very interesting 5 years, is it?
It's 4 years.
It's 4 years, 4 years.
4 years.
So
Yes.
you're going to be quite busy for the next 4 years, to say the least. So with all the different aspects, and this is just my second to last question, there's all these different aspects that's so very important and it's rewarding, but there's also so much frustrations in doing this work, because you see, a lot of times, I think Carlos talks about, you go one step forward and then 2 steps back, because you see all these different things in the world that's happening with environmental issues, that environmental issues aren't being solved, or they're being solved in a superficial way. So as a personal question, how do you, what is your drive? What motivates you to do this work that's so very important, but can also lead to a lot of frustration, cynicism, and things like that too? And what can people learn from you too, just, on how to keep on going without being too discouraged and too upset to go on? Someone talked about this in another video interview, that they brought up Nietzsche, and Nietzsche says, to live in society is a lot of times to forget a lot of times, because if you remember all the oppressions and unsustainability and injustices and violence, is that you'll never go on, because it's so difficult. The world is so difficult in different ways. So how do you motivate yourself to do your work?
Well, yeah, Greg, I think at this point of my life and my career, I try to use my experience to contribute for something which I think is necessary for creating a better future for all and for the planet. I think it is a modest, humble contribution I still can make. and I do it with great pleasure. So I think that's about what drives me to continue working, and especially working on the issues concerning the chair. Yeah, I think that's what really keeps moving myself. As Paulo Freire says in the last sentence of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, yeah, and hoping that we will have a world which is less ugly, and where it is less difficult to love. Yeah, these are the final words of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And I think this kind of drives me or moves me to make this contribution right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that it does, because it's very much needed, all the work that you're doing. Thank you. And my last question is there any questions that I should have asked, or is there any aspects that that you would like to add before we finish up?
No, Greg, there are no more questions, but I think there are many questions to be discussed, yeah? Greg, I would very much like to discuss with you and others, for instance, how did we end up where we are today? Yeah? How did we end up where we are today? Even having such references as Paulo Freire, yeah? How could it happen? What can we do differently to not keep asking the same question, say, in the future, not us, but those who come after us? Yeah. So these are questions, Greg, that I think we will need to be addressing now and whatever, I guess. Yeah. Thank you. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share some ideas today.
No, thank you. And those last words are so very important. You know, this aspect that Freire talks about, that we have to have an education that teaches students to have possible utopias, to going toward some sort of praxis. And so much of education, including environmental pedagogies, this is an aspect of fatalism. You know, it's unfortunate how the world is, but it's going to continue like that. And like my last question and how you responded, it's this aspect that we're always going to have frustrations going towards not getting the goals. There's going to be continuing injustices and oppressions and unsustainability, and hopefully we're going working towards ending that. But if we've made the world how it is currently, with all its aspects of empowerment and justice, and also aspects of injustices, oppressions, unsustainability, you know, we can also change the world and things like that. And a lot of times, you know, education is this aspect that, you know, change is impossible, transformation is impossible. And how can we do that? And it seems like such a fundamental aspect, I think, overall in your work and in the goals of UNESCO Chair. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.